Nice. Okay. All right. So here's my quick disclaimer. We've seen a lot of great presentations in these sessions from individuals who have a lot of expertise and have done a lot of different deals, presenting their methods and their different opportunities and whatnot. This isn't that presentation, right? I'm admittedly a novice real estate developer. I started down this path really with you guys, right? I was actually in one of these sessions before I did my very first multifamily deal. This is really a summary of my kind of personal discovery over the last couple of years, the conclusions I've made, and I'm very open to hearing your comments, suggestions, criticisms, even or partnership. So that's what this is about today for me. All right. So first, I'll give you just a little bit about my background. It really started by virtue of the fact that my dad was a general contractor, right? So ever since I was a kid, we got pictures of us helping to build whatever my dad was building at the time. He built a home for the Parade of Homes in 1976, just outside Columbus, and he had a lot of work basically from that. So ever since I was in high school, I was building. So it's kind of part of who I am now, is I build. Also, somewhere along the way, I gained this affinity for historic structures. I just love the architecture that you don't really see in modern structures, and kind of the thought process. Everything was interesting with stuff that was built in the olden days, and so in addition to building, I typically buy old stuff and work on that. In fact, since my wife and I have been married, we have always owned an old building that was our project. Usually, we lived in that project and did fix and flips. In school, I did engineering, and so I really like tackling challenging problems. So if there's a building that has like foundation issues or something like that, that is interesting to me. I actually really like that. So I actually built my career around cybersecurity. And the whole time I was doing this in kind of this white collar world, I always came home on the weekends and I felt like I needed this what I call my blue collar outlet, right? I had to do something with my hands, had to build something. And I loved kind of the experience of that. I loved seeing something transition, by virtue of my own efforts. So the other aspect of working this white collar job is that I had solo economic dependency, which I hated. And the other thing is, if you've spent any time in corporate America recently, you know that it sucks, right? There are so many. I can tell you so many stories of all the things that you can't say, that you can't do, that you can't think in corporate America today without offending somebody. It's crazy. So all of this kind of led me to, I need to get serious about doing something else. And I really decided I want to do multifamily. I was doing single family, right, for a long time. But the problem with single family is whenever that building is vacant, right, whenever that project is vacant, you're making no money on that. With multifamily, obviously, a single family moves out, a single unit is open, and it could provide a very little dent in your monthly income. So I figured, okay, multifamily was probably the way I wanted to go. So I kind of dug into multifamily syndications, and I learned about the process, which was really interesting. You basically improve the premises, you improve the management, the property management, the asset management. You basically end up increasing the rents because of those improvements. And during the holding time, the property appreciates, and then you have a big exit. You sell it for more than you bought it for, and all your investors make money. But there's things about that multifamily model that I also didn't like. For one, multifamily doesn't like substantial rehab. Everything is cosmetic. Um, and that kind of conflicts with this whole idea that I build. I'm a builder, right? Um, they don't like dilapidated properties, right? And that kind of rules out historic buildings in general. And I like historic buildings, right? They also don't like big problems, right? A foundation problem is, in any building is a non-starter for a multifamily syndication. But I mean, I'm happy with those. I can deal with those. The other thing about multifamily syndications is that typically for a general partnership on a multifamily deal, you have um, either a large corporation or you have a partnership where there's a whole bunch of people involved. You have people that are searching for deals. You have people that are doing due diligence, um, doing estimating. Some people that are guaranteeing loans, putting earnest money deposits down. So there can be 20 or 30 people in a general partnership, and your portion of that as a contributor is tiny, or you're a limited partner where you don't do any work at all. And for me, I'm a doer. Um, and so all those things made me think that, okay, the traditional multifamily syndication model is not for me. And so I had to find something that kind of fit with my taste. And what I found was I could do small multifamily with some substantial rehabilitation. The reason that multifamily syndications don't typically like rehabilitation is, first of all, it's typically not their expertise, right? To be comfortable with substantial rehab, you have to have some construction experience, right? You have to be comfortable in that world. It also poses a risk, but the rewards with substantial rehab are quite significant. So I'll give you some examples of that. I like historic. My target is something less than 100 doors, let's say. One of the things that I discovered in the first couple projects that I was doing is that if you're flipping a single family home, there's a whole bunch of things that you have to do. You have to run the numbers. You got to raise the funds. You're going to hire contractors, oversee what work they do. Get construction financing, all that sort of thing. That's the exact same thing that you have to do when you're doing small multifamily. There's not very many additional steps involved. The scope of each one of these is more, but it's like on the order of twice as much as opposed to X times the number of doors that you're doing. So it feels really comfortable for me. The thing that I think I like the most is that with small multifamily, you don't actually have to sell the deal at the end in order to make money at it. So this is kind of my model. This is where I felt comfortable. So the second question that I really had to answer is, do I want to do this in an urban environment or rural? For me, I live right outside Columbus, Ohio, right? I've got access to this urban environment. And I'll tell you, just kind of comparing the two, the urban environments, there's a lot of competition for buildings that go on the market, which means when there's a lot of competition, they're expensive. um, and the big developers don't mind that, and they're competing with each other in the big city. But I didn't feel like I'm in a position to compete with them. Contrast that to the rural communities where I've been focusing. There's very little acquisition competition. So to give you a kind of example of the three jobs or the three deals that I've been working on, the first one, our partner bought a Main Street building built in 1881 with 2 commercial units on the bottom and 5 residential units on top on the upper 2 floors. Bought it for $50,000. Now it's about a $1.4 million project. It needed substantial rehabilitation, but your cost of acquisition was super low. The second one was a school built in 1915 that we're turning into 26 to 28 apartments. There were three bidders on that. I went a little bit high. above the asking price, and then with the results of the inspection, I got the credit came back down lower. I'm just right at it was a $500,000 asking price. The deal we found on Facebook wasn't even on the MLS. So, and then the third deal is another school in a rural community. This is one I'm working on right now, and I'm going to run the numbers on this for you. This is going to be $500,000. It's been on the market for 11 months. You would never see that in a metro area. So the reason the deals can work in the metro area, even though the acquisition cost is high, is because the rents are high. But the same thing is true for the rural areas where the rents are lower. Since the acquisition costs are lower, the deals work, right? Once the building is done, there's pretty significant competition for apartments in that metro area. If you think about it, in Columbus, Ohio, you want to rent an apartment, you're going to have 20 to 40 different options in the metroplex. And so if an apartment operator is operating at 80 to 90% occupancy, they're doing really very well. Anything above 90 is, incredible. In the rural communities, the housing shortage is even more profound. Um, the recent housing needs assessment that we did on this second one showed that the vacancy was around 2% in the entire area. Now, here's the other thing. In this area, there's been no new apartments that have come on the market for the last 15 years. So that's 2% vacancy for really old stock. And so 2% vacancy, as you can kind of figure in your head, that's about a week. That's how long it takes to turn an apartment, which it's be really tough to do it in less than a week, right? To have to go in there, clean and paint or whatnot. So that's about as low as it can be. The other thing in the metro areas is there is red tape bureaucracy surrounding development activities, right? Sometimes the public image, they don't want apartments in their backyard, this and that. You're just another developer in these metroplexes, where in the rural communities, their doors are swung so wide open, you wouldn't believe it. There is absolutely incredible support. The municipalities are willing to bend over backwards to help you be successful because they are so desperate for investment and housing in their neighborhoods. So, for example, Ohio has a deal where they'll give you a 75% tax abatement for 15 years if your property is within a community defined community reinvestment area. In the second deal that we did, we asked the city if we could redefine the community reinvestment area to encompass our project. No problem, they did it. And encompass that. We've signed an agreement, 15 years, 75% tax abatement. On the third deal, I already talked to the city. They're more than happy to put the whole city within the community reinvestment area if that means that we will do development there. Overall, you can see I'm biased now, right? Is I actually love the idea of developing in these rural communities. It's not just these tangible benefits, it's also the intangibles of knowing that you can make, a difference in this community, a profound difference in this community, and that it can be, it can build wealth at the same time for you. Okay, so a couple other things about developing in these areas. One of the things about buying historic buildings is that you can apply for historic tax credits. The historic tax credits can be very lucrative. The state of Ohio has a program. Most states have a historic tax credit program, but the state of Ohio's is they'll provide you up to 35% of your qualified rehabilitation expenses if you're in a rural community. And the very cool thing about Ohio is, you can use it's a tax offset initially, and if you don't need it, they'll just pay out the rest in cash. So it's basically like a grant. Now it is competitive, and if you ask for 35%, it makes you less competitive than the ones that are asking for less. So there's a balance there, but that can actually be lucrative. The federal historic tax credit applies across every state. If you comply with the Department of Interior's standards for rehabilitation, you're eligible for that 20%. That's basically all there is to it. Now your property has to be historic somehow in order to qualify, like on the National Register for historic places. But 20% of your rehab expenses coming back to you is actually really good. With historic tax credits, you have to take straight line depreciation for properties that are not eligible for historic tax credits, like this third deal that I'll be discussing. You can use accelerated depreciation by doing, a cost segregation study, and then hand those losses, those passive losses, back to your investors, which actually can make a big difference. And I'll give you an example of what that looks like. Energy tax credits. This was just renewed recently. It actually provides, this Section 45L provides $5,000 per unit, per door, if you comply in your rehab with the Energy Star multifamily standards, which we intend to do. And then there's a tax abatement I mentioned earlier, which basically just that tax abatement can be the difference between a property tax cash flowing or not, which is awesome. And then Ohio, this area in Ohio, just east of Columbus, is where Appalachia officially starts. And as you can imagine, Appalachia has been hit hard. I mean, this is coal producing communities, right, throughout Appalachia. They were hit very hard by our move away from coal. And so there's a whole bunch of programs locally, state level, regional, federal, that are aimed at supporting Appalachia. So on this second deal that we did, the city actually applied for a technical assistance grant from one of these regional organizations, which got us $50,000 in consulting. Basically, that's what we used to change that CRA so that we could apply for tax abatement. We did a housing needs assessment. We did some engineering and architecture work. It was awesome. Anyway, there's a lot of programs like that we can be eligible by developing in these rural communities. Okay, so what's it look like? What am I doing out there? Finding the properties is actually the easy part. Since we started doing development in these communities, I've had several people, the Chamber of Commerce, the Port Authority, private owners that have come to us and said, hey, can you help us with this project or this project or this project? Deal flow is not a problem in the rural communities. So, I mean, this school that I'm going to talk about as this third deal, that was given to us really by the Port Authority and said, please have a look at this and consider developing it. So we run the numbers. I typically need some investment. I set up an LLC with an operating agreement and a PPM if necessary. The investors contribute their dollars to the LLC, and then the LLC will buy the property directly. This is actually a really clean way to do it. It keeps anybody's personal name off any of the records, and the LLC itself owns it. So I gather my team. That's kind of the architect, the general contractor. We found a really good team, our financing team, get quotes and drawings. I start applying for tax credits and the other benefits, get the construction loan, do the build, and then refi into, if possible, into an agency loan or some other low interest rate loan. The reason that I don't pursue these avenues on the build is because they have about a year lead time to get funding through these methods, and I need to move faster than that. So it's not worth the 2 or 3% difference in interest rate that I'll pay on the construction loan. And then at the end of it, we can hold the deal, we can sell the property, whatever makes sense. But my goal is to hold the deal. The one caveat is you'll see that the ROI on the equity that you gain by rehabbing a property like this is very significant, which you may not be able to realize without actually selling the deal. So since we're kind of in this royal legal group, I thought it'd be worthwhile to just kind of go over what the legal structure looks like. So for me, I set up a single purpose LLC in Ohio. that actually that single purpose is to buy and develop the property. That's it. The This simplifies all sorts of things from a financing perspective. The banks that typically want several years of of the financials from your organization, they've never balked at. We have a single purpose LLC that just is focused on this property. So we buy the property. Now I have kind of the typical Royal suggested structure, and so I have a series LLC based in Texas. I create a child series for each of these deals, and that child series becomes a member of that Ohio single purpose LLC. Um, I also have an operating company based in Ohio. It does everything active within the state. In fact, on the first deal that we did, the bank asked a question along the lines of, um, your Series LLC is not what do they call it, registered or domesticated in Ohio, and it needs to be. And I said it really doesn't need to be because it's not doing anything active. My operating company is doing all the active activities in Ohio. It is the manager of that single purpose LLC. And then I have this agreement, and I had to actually show this agreement to the bank in one case, that the operating company is doing all the work and is the agent of that series LLC. And then, of course, the other limited partners, they are also members of that Ohio LLC. So that's kind of how the legal structure applies to this particular deal. So in terms of the payment flow, the operating company is also the asset manager for the property, right? So it actually manages this LLC and in turn the assets within that LLC. It hires the property manager. So when the property manager collects rent, that payment flows back to the operating company, and then of course the operating company distributes those. And then I think I showed you before, I take a percentage of what goes to the holding company. This operating company is taxed as an S corp, and I'm paid a wage out of that operating company. So for me, the operating company is providing my day to day, my salary, and the Series LLC is reinvesting all of its dollars. So that's the way I've structured it. Okay. So I wanted to do a quick primer on the 1% rule because I think it's relevant. It's interesting when you compare it to what this deal looks like. So the 1% rule is basically, as a real estate investor, a property is a good deal if it produces in rents 1% of the cash that you have invested in it. And there's a few different ways to kind of articulate it, but that's basically the 1% rule. It allows you to look at deals quickly and see if that's actually good, going to be a good investment. So if you take an example, if you have to pay $100,000 for a property and it will rent for $1,000 a month, that meets the 1% rule, right? That is a good deal. If we dig a little bit deeper, typically you would have as standard expenses about 50% of that $1,000, which would result in $6,000 a year in income or 6% in terms of cash on cash return, right? If you're really good at narrowing your expenses, you can get that down lower, which I think we all hope for. If you can get it down to 35%, then you're going to be making like 7.8% on your money from in terms of profit. So what I conclude from this is that the 1% rule provides a 6 to 8% cash on cash return. And so keep that in mind as we look at this deal. So this is just an example of the type of deal I'm pursuing. And it's my next one. It is also a school. I think I mentioned it'll be $500,000. I walked my general contractor through it. It's going to be this is still rough, but it's about 1.05 million to do the build out. The school is in really good shape. It's been modernized. There's HVAC units in every classroom, that sort of thing. It'll be 13 units. I run through a number of different models, and the one that produces the best um, net operating income is if I do a triple net lease to a senior living home operator. Now, why do this? One of the things that you kind of have to do in these rural communities is to figure out what is it the community needs. And the interesting thing is that the leadership in the community, the Chamber of Commerce, the Port Authority, the city development director, they'll tell you exactly what they need. This particular community has a housing stock that they want to make available to new families moving into the area for jobs and whatnot. They can't make the housing stock available because the seniors can't afford to move out of their homes. There's no place for them to go. They can't downsize because they can't afford a new mortgage at the high interest rates, and there's virtually nothing for them to move into. And so they have asked if you could do senior living to help us move people out of the homes to make the homes available, to people that are moving in. That would be great. So I included that, and it turns out the numbers work really well. The income um, would be about $1,100 a month per unit. Now you can probably already see that that's going to sound really low to many of you. Now I think that these are one bedroom units, right? They would probably rent for $1,500 a month if we were just renting them regularly. The net operating income of this model is actually better because the expenses are so low than a standard rental, even at $1,500 a month. So one of the things that you can see is, oh, that 14,000 is pretty close to the 1% rule right there. And that's true. But you'll also notice that my expenses are almost nothing in a triple net model, right? Because the operator is going to be paying the real estate taxes. They're going to be paying standard maintenance. They're going to be paying insurance on the building. Okay, so that means the net operating income for this unit, it'll be about 162,000. So my goal is to raise 350,000, and the construction time frame is 6 months. Now, I typically plan for, um, significantly longer than the GC says it will take. So I'm planning on 1 year, but I think it's practical to do construction of this place in 6 months. Okay, so what does that look like for a limited partner? I don't know if you guys have sort of checked out some of the syndications that you've been you've been hearing about, some of the offers. There's a lot of people that are offering syndications, and if you'll notice the interest rates that they're offering in terms of preferred returns, they're not great. They're not great, and that's one of the reasons that I felt like I need to be doing I need to be contributing in this area. So this is what it looks like for me. So if I'm going to sell 55% equity in that LLC, um, the federal tax credits that I mentioned earlier, the $5,000 per unit, we break that up. I'm allocating almost 36,000 to the limited partnership. That is about 5,000 or more than 5,000 per $50,000 invested. Okay, which is 10.21. So this is just by completing the rehab, the construction. Okay, the accelerated depreciation cost seg after it's done. My estimate is that we'll get 100,000 in accelerated depreciation, which is almost 15,000 per $50,000 invested, or 29%. So add those together, you're almost at 40% return on that $50,000 investment just by completing the construction. This is why I love construction. Makes a huge difference. Okay, so using those same numbers, the cash flow, 55% of the cash flow will be 27,000, and that's 4,000 per $50,000 invested, or close to 4,000, and that's at 7.81%. So back to the 1% rule. Remember what we said? A 1% rule is going to make between 6 and 8%. This is the upper range of the 1% rule already. So and we haven't even talked about what kind of equity is going to be gained from this. So 55% of the ARV is about 1.3 million. If you take into account the construction loan, the equity is over 650,000 or 93,000 per $50,000 invested, right? So the ROI just from equity, ignore all the rest of that, is 87%. Now, this is preliminary. This is my calculations. The cash flow depends very much on the interest rate of the construction loan. I can get an 8% construction loan right now without a problem, but there is my bank offers what they call a swap rate. I don't know if you're familiar with swap rates, but we ought to have a session on it because it's actually really interesting how it works. But suffice it to say that it's a pretty hard lock-in for a certain amount of time, and the interest rates are very compelling. So if I lower this 8% here to 6.75%, which is the current swap rate for our bank, everything stays the same except the cash flow. And you can see the cash flow actually increases to over 9.5% from this. And so that also should tell you that, hey, the cash flow is going to be even better once you refi into something lower interest going forward. So what's that look like over the long term, you might ask? So what I typically do is I'll increment the rent and the expenses by the same amount. I'm being conservative here. I'm saying 3%. If you've been following rent increases over the last few years, they have been up to 12% per year since the pandemic. So this 3% is pretty conservative. But this tells you cash on cash return and ROI simply from an equity standpoint. And you can see that by year two, by the end of year two, by the way, this is years of stabilization. So after the first year of stabilization, you've made, 90%. By the second year, you have doubled your money, 104%. And then you can kind of see what it gets to by year 10. But that is the reason that I'm motivated by this idea of rural development. So I'll take any questions.